So we are learning about evaluating artwork. The point to doing an artwork evaluation is to understand it and define the meaning. What is an evaluation? So all it is combining multiple types of analyses so that you can um, understand the work, basically. When you only do one type of analysis, it makes it difficult to fully understand it. It'll help you understand the work better, but it won't get you to a complete understanding. And so, to be able to understand it completely, you've got to look at it in a variety of ways, and that's what the evaluation is for. Now, the first evaluation we make is a value judgment. We like it, we don't like it, right? As soon as we look at an artwork, that's the first thing we decide. The point when you're doing an evaluation is to move past your value judgment um, and do your evaluation from an unbiased perspective. So, in the same way that we've looked at the visual analysis and you've been able to um, look at works that you probably haven't been such a fan of, even though there's some that you have been, you can still look at the elements and principles from an unbiased perspective and think, how have they used the elements? How have they used the principles? What decisions have they made along the way? In the same way, you'll be able to do research and really look at an artwork. This will come in handy when you get to the end of the class and it's your job to choose the artwork that you will end up evaluating. Because I recommend that you choose an artwork you either love or hate. If you're wishy-washy, the research isn't interesting. Some of the best projects I've ever done have been on are things that I hate. The research becomes pretty interesting because I either um, just hate it more, or actually, the more I learn, the more I realize I didn't hate it as much as I thought. Sometimes those initial value judgments are because we just don't understand something. And the more we understand it, the more we realize that those initial judgments were incorrect. And that's when research becomes such a valuable and refreshing tool. And that's the beauty of it. So, some of you, the next part is going to seem a little redundant, but for a lot of you, you haven't done research before. So I make sure that I go through this to help and ensure that you'll be able to do proper research. It's important to understand that research must be relevant to what you're trying to figure out. So pertinent, relevant, it's the same thing. Just because you're looking up information on a particular artist or a particular artwork doesn't mean it's all going to be relevant, the stuff that comes up. So for instance, if you discover that an artist loves horses and you're doing a biographical analysis, that might be relevant information if, say, the artist paints horses because their love of horses shows up in the subject matter. But if they paint landscapes or trees or something, like that, or cityscapes, or non-representational artworks, then that information is irrelevant, is extraneous information, extra information that is off topic. And you wouldn't put it in your paper, and so you discard it and look for better information. So that's what I'm talking about when I say the more pertinent information to the artwork you're researching that you include in your analysis, the better you will understand the work. So if the point is to understand it, it's your job to find the best research you can. Um, and if you struggle with that, then it's your job to ask for help. As a scholar, I happen to be very good at researching, so this is why I always recommend you do research a little bit early, even if you can't start writing right away, so that if you struggle with it, you have time to reach out and ask for help. Now, another example is to ensure that you show why it's relevant. So, I had a student write a paper about a particular artist, and he spent a long time in the paper explaining how the artist loved to travel, spent most of his life traveling throughout the world, and and did watercolor paintings everywhere that he went, and it was something that he really loved to do. And I crossed out the entire thing and said that it was all off topic, it was irrelevant information, and it shouldn't have been in the paper. Um, and he came to me and said that he was really confused because it was important biographical information, because he ended up getting a bad grade because he didn't have biographical information then. He said that the artist then took those watercolor paintings home to his studio, turned them into large oil paintings, and the artwork that he was analyzing was one of those oil paintings. His mistake was he didn't explain that. And so it's your job, especially those of you who are really new to writing research papers, you have to make sure that you explain to the reader in the paper why the information is relevant as well. You can't just assume that we know, because it's really easy to do that because you've been doing the research, so it just makes sense to you. So you just got to be clear in the writing why it's relevant, okay? So those are kind of two things that are important. The other reason why we do an evaluation is to make sure that we find the meaning. So your research isn't done until you fully understand the artwork and you've discovered the meaning. Okay? So that's usually my rule for students. Not usually, that is the rule. You haven't done proper research if you don't understand the work. There are 3 different levels of meaning for an artwork, basically. Your job is to get to level 3 if you want credit for the meaning. The level 1, you don't get credit at all because you're just describing the subject matter. What the work literally means, you're really just describing what you see. Even if you describe it in a creative way, you're still just describing what you see. Number 2, what the work means to you. You're going a little bit deeper. It's kind of like you're digging a hole. If you ever, when you were a kid, dug a hole to China, you understand what I mean. You got bored easy and you went away before you made any real effort. Because the problem with that is you haven't made the effort to really understand the intention of the artist. You're just relating it to your own experience rather than fully understanding the artwork. So this is like, from my own experience, like what I see here is ... And then level 3 is that underlying metaphoric or symbolic meaning. Now, the underlying meaning is not always metaphoric or symbolic, but most of the time it is. Sometimes artworks don't have metaphors involved. And so if they don't, if the meaning is a little bit more literal, you can still read into the artwork. What do I mean by that? For instance, so let me kind of describe an artwork for a second. I do have another example on the next slide, so just bear with me. But for example, genre painting is when you have, you're literally kind of looking at the world around you. So you might have a painting that looks at like a farmer and his wife on their farm. You might read into whether or not the farmer and his wife are happy, or they have a, you know, successful or an unsuccessful farm based on whether or not it's dilapidated, if they have good crops growing, you know what I mean? Like what you actually see going on. Or you might look at like something that is like 15th century um, life in the Flemish lands. And so you might read into like how you understand how hard it was to live because it's the middle of winter and there's hunters coming home. This is a real painting. Both of these examples are. Um, it's called Hunters in the Snow. They come home and literally one of the hunters has what looks like a starved raccoon. And none of the other hunters do. And the hunting dogs all look like they're starving. Um, and so it looks like it's a very difficult life. Another way that students have read into this particular artwork is that, you know, they are obviously from like the servants that are working, and then we have other servants that are doing the laundry, and they're in the foreground. And then in the middle ground, we have children and adults that are playing in the middle of the day. They're ice skating. And so it shows a separation of the classes. And so they've read into it in that way. So it's still showing everyday life, but they're kind of exploring what that everyday life was really like, rather than just saying what, you know, just like the literal. Um, and so that's what I mean by there's not really a metaphor in those types of artworks, but you can still kind of look at what's underlying. So um, here we have um, an artwork that um, is, if you've done the midterm review, a part of the midterm review, which is the literal meaning would be um, there are fishermen in the boats, you know, in fear of the wave about to crash down. You're really just kind of describing the subject matter. What it means to you might be something like, I've been out at sea in a bad storm, and I know the fear of big waves. You know, I understand that fear. So you're coming to the meaning of like, you know, the fear of nature, the fear of the ocean, but you're not trying to understand the intention of the artist, like from like the research of content and context and stuff like that. You're relating it to your own experience. Or, you know, I've fished in the ocean and experienced, you know, a swell of waves and had to hold on to the sides. Like I've experienced going up on a wave like this in a small boat, and it's really scary. That kind of thing. You're still, again, relating it to your own experience instead of trying to go to that third level, which is what you get full credit for in the meaning. Um, so to get full credit, this particular work, there's several underlying meanings here that you could come up with. Things like, um, you know, the power of Mother Nature, man versus nature, not giving up in the face of defeat, you know, the idea of perseverance, the yin and yang of the chaos of the waves versus the peace of um, the background, you know, the mountain, and you know the harmony, you know, these two things in harmony, that perfect balance. um, I've even had students read into by the context that's in this artwork how the great wave looks like a hand, reaching down to control their citizens, which would be the people in the boats, since the government at the time was a dictatorship. So there's all sorts of metaphoric or symbolic meanings that you could read into this particular work. The formal analysis we've already learned, so I'm just going to kind of go through this as a brief reminder. There's 3 different things we look at. The first would be how the artwork is made in terms of the medium and the technique. The second is discussing the decisions the artist has made about the composition and how it comes together and how it's organized. So discussing the elements and principles. Most importantly, you must discuss how the artwork is balanced and how the artwork is unified in every formal analysis. And lastly, in the art world, we value innovation above everything else. So discussing an artist's individual style and what makes the artwork unique is important as well. This can be done in a variety of ways. The first would be discussing what is in an artist's individual style. If they work in a group that came up with a set of ideas, it would be important to note the ideas that the group came up with, giving the group credit, and then comparing how the way that they interpreted those ideas is different than someone else's. So again, we looked at Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night, and this was made with oil and canvas using that impasto technique, which adds a wax medium that thickens the paint like a cake frosting, which builds up a very thick texture to the painting. In terms of individual style and that innovative style, this is Gustav Klimt, and he is notable for his golden period, where he added a lot of gold leaf to the artworks. And then we discuss the Impressionists and how they rejected realism and were interested in capturing an impression of their subject. We're also interested in how light falls over subjects and exploring color in new ways. And so you might explore the differences between Monet and Degas. So if we did a brief little visual analysis, we looked at the Grand Odalisque early on. Just briefly, this was our example of an abstract artwork when we went over style terms. And so here, notice like it's abstract because of the proportions, the elongated spine and pelvis. The use of space here would be how the body of the nude takes up the entire frame of the canvas in terms of the positive space. Her head, elbow, and buttocks are inches away from the edge of the canvas, and her toes extend beyond the bounds of the edge, actually. In terms of color, he contrasts the warm tones of the nude skin against the cool colored silk that she lies on, and creates a complementary color scheme with the use of orange and blue. The foreground is unlit, which brings attention to the long, sensuous body of the odalisque, which seems to be cast into a spotlight, and then contrasted with a dark shadow behind her. We also have a variety of textures in the artwork. We have this beautiful satin curtain on the right, that has this ornate pattern to it. She holds a fan with peacock feathers. There is this fur underneath her. There's the rumpled, um, wrinkled sheets below her, as well as the belted with the beads. She's got a different type of um, fabric that she wears as a turban and has other beads in her hair. All of these different um, textures create some really nice visual interest, creating that variety. It's asymmetrically balanced with more weight on the left because of her body, but because of the ornately decorated patterned curtain, it does help to balance out the weight. The complementary color scheme does create unity, and so does the way that he's using the light. It really brings things together in the artwork. His use of emphasis and subordination also works really well, with the the background being really dull, and then with her face as the focal point, it really draws you to that. And then he's using her arm as a directional force that leads you to the curtain, which, because of the pattern, your eyes are kind of drawn to. And so, with that, it does help to create a strong emphasis. So, with the use of emphasis, subordination, and then that contrast, it really brings things together. Now we're going to move on to the contextual analysis. The thing is, um, sometimes students find that this chapter is overwhelming because you've learned a lot already in class and it seems like you're learning a whole new set of um, things. But the point is, you're really not. You guys know context. It was one of the first things we learned. It was in the first handout that you guys read. So, a contextual analysis is just providing context for an artwork. So you can relax. The only thing that this chapter really does is teach you how to organize your research. Okay? So it tells you as you're researching where the information belongs. That's all that this really does. So context just helps you like understand the artwork better. This is a contextual analysis is only done through research. So you must research to be able to do a contextual analysis. This cannot be gleaned from looking at an artwork. You can only do it by actually reading and articles and books and looking things up online, etc. Context is simply anything that helps you understand more about the artwork itself, how it fits into the world, and why it was made. Keep in mind in the next type of analysis, um, like biographical information is a part of it. So it is information that helps you understand the artwork. So if it's information about the artist, it doesn't fit into context. Alright, so as soon as the information that you're researching switches over to the artist, it'll end up being pushed into the next type of analysis. The first thing we examine when we're looking at artworks is environmental influences. So where the artwork was made. The economic system, cultural values, politics, etc. It doesn't mean that you have to end up discussing them in your contextual analysis, but you have to at least consider if they've affected the making of the artwork. So for instance, if a female feminist artist is making artwork in Afghanistan, you're going to need to discuss that, and it has to be looked at differently than one made in America. Because the woman that's making feminist artwork in America has no risk. She has complete freedom. Not just freedom of speech, but she has complete freedom. She can make whatever she wants, and there is absolutely no risk to her for what she does. Yes, there are some stigmas and things for females still to some degree, right, in America. I mean, I'm a feminist. There are some issues with equality for women in America. Totally. And I believe in righting those. It's nothing compared to the things that women face in other countries where where women's rights are actually an issue. Um, and Afghanistan is an example of that. That if there's a female artist working in Afghanistan, taking on women's rights, um, they are putting themselves in danger um, to have their work destroyed, to be injured, dismembered, jailed, or put to death. Do you understand? So, because of that, and this has to do with their cultural values, their religions, the politics there, the system, the system that they come from. And because of that, we must consider that. So in America, we don't need to talk about the economic system or the politics involved for the female feminist artist. You might discuss like the the issues that surround it, that surround the feminist, the women's equality. But in countries where that's not an issue, right? So an artist, and it doesn't have to be feminist. I just use it because it's one of those things that makes it really easy to understand when you're dealing with serious risk. In the same way, like Chinese artists deal with a lot of censorship. And so that's something that you absolutely need to explore in a contextual analysis. But, artists working in the UK, France, many countries in Central and in South America have a lot of freedoms and are able to work, but in other places aren't. Um, Most European countries, they have lots of freedoms to work. A lot of South African countries have a lot of freedoms to work, but in other places in Africa they don't. It just kind of depends on where they're at and what's going on. So it's important to research like what's happening. Other things like a controversial artwork that's made here in America, you might start to research in it. So, for instance, Chris O'Feely made a Black Mary and using elephant dung in the artwork. It was supremely controversial enough that um, that they wanted the Brooklyn Museum where it was shown shut down. Um, it was in a controversial, like the show that it was in was a controversial show. Every artwork in it was controversial. But if you actually research it and you listen to him talk about the artwork, he had just gone to Africa to where his family, like where his ancestors are from, where his family is from. And it's very common, of course, to have Mary be black there, to have all religious figures be black there. And elephant dung is actually used in is considered a holy material and is used in artworks, religious artworks there. Um, and he was exploring his cultural identity. Now, he didn't address the fact that he cut up a bunch of pornographic images and included them in the artwork, But nobody had a problem with that. Everybody had a problem with the fact that Mary was black and he used elephant dung in the artwork. Um, I took more offense to the, porn magazine, uh, vaginas cut up all over and put all over the artwork. But if you research it, you will find, you discover that the issues they had actually um, had to do more with ignorance of culture than of anything else. And so it's very interesting when you start to research something, you can actually learn um, a lot about the reasoning behind things and why people make certain decisions and why certain things are the way they are. That's the whole point of context. Other things that you then explore are what else was going on at the time that may have influenced the making of it. So, if you're looking at an abstract expressionism artwork or a color field painting, the first two movements that came out of New York right after the art world shifted from Paris to New York, you would absolutely need to address the fact that World War I and World War II forced the art world to move from Paris to New York. This is also where you discuss the art movement. So you say, you discuss what art movement it's a part of, give some history on the movement, discuss the characteristics of the movement, like the characteristics that the artwork has because it's a part of that movement, and then point out which characteristics of the movement the artwork you're analyzing has. Because it won't usually have them all. So just look at the artwork and actually list the ones you see that are a part of the movement. What historical importance the artwork has. So like the Mona Lisa literally changed the way that portraiture was done because a landscape had never been put behind a person before. It always had, just a flat, plain background. But after that, landscape had always been added. So portraiture in Western culture changed with the Mona Lisa. She also was stolen twice, and each time she was stolen, she became more famous. Religious significance usually has to do with the religious artworks, but sometimes secular artworks also have some religious significance. For instance, the Protestant Reformation broke away from the Catholic Church. A big part of that was they accused the Church of iconoclasm, worshiping images, um, and idolizing images. And so, in the beginning, there was absolutely no decoration in Protestant churches, and even today, there's very little decoration in Protestant churches. So, most of the artwork that was created before the Protestant Reformation was religious. The church was the biggest contributor to the art world. And so all of a sudden we have these artists that that couldn't make religious artwork anymore. Now, of course, this happens during the Renaissance, and the church is based in Italy. So the Renaissance happens in Italy, so it's not affecting the Italian artists, but the Northern Renaissance, it definitely affected because that's really where the Protestant Reformation took hold first. So the artists in the Northern Renaissance had to invent new types of artwork. So genre painting, which I explained earlier, painting, what was going on around you, and still lifes, which we've learned about earlier in class, setting up objects to paint or draw, were invented because of the Protestant Reformation. So if you're looking at one of those types of artworks in the Northern Renaissance, you must point out the religious significance because they were literally invented because of the church, because of the break in the church. Again, the next thing would be if the artwork tells a story, what is the story in the artwork? And it's really important that you tell the actual story happening in the work. I once had a student choose the story The Birth of Venus, or the painting The Birth of Venus, which is a nude woman standing in a shell, because the Venus was born a fully grown woman, and the god of wind, Zephyr, blows her to the shore. Now he's in the upper left-hand corner, blowing her to the shore, and on the shore, attendants wait to clothe her. So on the shore, there's a woman holding, a garment to clothe her. That's the story of the birth of Venus. So that's the story that needs to be told in the contextual analysis, so that people know what's happening in the artwork. It's really important that if there is an actual story to be told, that you tell the story. Now, the conception of Venus is a much more raunchy story, because Greek mythology is fascinating. And my student was much more fascinated by that and decided to tell that story instead, and got a 0 on his context because he didn't help the reader understand what was going on in the artwork. The story of the conception, which I'll share very briefly, is that another god in Greek mythology was a player. He was a major horn dog and would sleep with anyone and everyone. And his father was also a god, obviously. And Greek gods, as you'll learn if you pick up a book on Greek mythology, which if you've never read it, I'm telling you, if this story isn't enough to get you to go pick up a book on it, I don't know what would, but it's the best in the world. It'll entertain you highly. They're pretty wrathful. They don't contain their anger very well. Kept wanting him to settle down and stop having sex with everyone. So he didn't listen to his father, and he didn't listen to his father. This is an ongoing theme in Greek mythology, by the way. The sons never do what the fathers tell them. And so one day the father walks in on his son having sex, pulls him off the woman, grabs a knife, and cuts off his penis. Throws it in the ocean, but he was almost finished, so it was full of semen. And his ejaculation, comes out of the penis and fertilizes a pearl in an oyster shell. And that conceives the goddess Venus. And that's why she was born a fully grown woman, out of an oyster shell in the middle of the ocean. So it's a crazy, great Greek story, but it doesn't help you understand the artwork, because he stopped there. So I don't even think he said she was born. He just said it it fertilized a pearl, and then ended there. Another part of context would be if there's a real person in it, or people, make sure you tell who they are and what their story is. So again, I can go back to the Mona Lisa. That is, a commissioned portrait. Da Vinci was hired by Mona Lisa's husband to paint her. So you would want to actually explain that, and explain, provide his name, who he is, who she is. The reason I don't give you all these details is you have the option to write about this for your write about it for your final paper. So I don't give all the magic away, because you have to do your own research. So there's that. Really, it's any information that's going to help you understand it better. So, um, I like to do the context for the Statue of Liberty because it will not only help you understand our most important cultural icon, which I find very sadly students just don't know anymore, but um, if you learn nothing else, you'll understand the Statue of Liberty better. But it also is one of those kind of important things that you should know, and um, usually makes pretty good sense. So it's effective. So first, in terms of context, the Statue of Liberty is located in New York, New York, in New York Harbor, and um, was put there because the United States wanted it, because it is the symbol for freedom and liberty, and that's what the country stands for, and that New York was the place where immigrants came first to enter the country, wanted this as our symbol for freedom to be the first thing that immigrants first saw as their welcome into the land of the free. Now, the the full context needs to go back even further. We need to understand where it came from, why we have it, um, and things like that. So this was a gift from France, and they gave it to us as a symbol of friendship, which, a friendship between two countries is an alliance, right? When we became allies with them. Now, here's usually we can get to this in a class with students, but this is usually where your knowledge starts to fade. So we became their allies during the American Revolution for a few reasons. We needed help to win the war. It's important to note that we would not have won the war without the French. They didn't fight with us, we fought our own war, but we needed their supplies. They provided weapons, guns, gunpowder, food, etc. So they gave us the supplies we needed to win. We had a common enemy, which was a big plus for them. The French hated the British because for centuries the British tried to overtake France and claim it as their own country. But they also saw a kinship with us because think about the French Revolution. The French Revolution was France as a country claiming their own freedom from a monarchy, and freedom of the people to form a republic. They did this, before any other country, and we were trying to establish the same thing. We were claiming freedom from the monarchy to establish a democracy, right? So this was a pretty big deal, and they saw a kinship with us within that. They were also in Canada, and we were in the United States, and so the opportunity for trade was bountiful. And we also promised that we would help them fight the Native Americans in the French and Indian War, which we automatically, right from the beginning, were really terrible allies and ended up not doing, which is why the French hate us so much, by the way. Not that that's context for the Statue of Liberty, but just, if you're wondering. So from the very beginning of our friendship, we were terrible friends. But so that is what established the alliance. Now, the Statue of Liberty is kind of a strange gift for them to give us as a symbol for this friendship. Most would think, right? But it's actually not, because we've looked at this painting already. And here we have the painting Liberty Leading the People by Francisco Delacroix. And here we have Liberty, instead of holding a light, holding the French flag, leading the French people to victory during the French Revolution. And if you notice, Liberty is the model that the French used to create the Statue of Liberty. So they offered us their symbol and hope for freedom from their revolution as a gift to us for our friendship. So this was a much bigger deal than people realize. It's not just, they were offering us a symbol of freedom. They were offering us their symbol of freedom. Now, here we have another artwork that we've looked at before, I believe. This is Judith beheading Holofernes by Caravaggio. And so I believe that you guys know the story, but just in case, this is the biblical story of Judith, who was an Israelite among, many Israelites that were about to surrender to Holofernes in his very, very large army. He was the general. Coming to take over the Israelites and enslave them. They were powerless to stop them and had to surrender. And Judith, the feminist that she was back in biblical times, said, "Oh no." And she went to Holofernes and seduced him, and after he fell asleep, beheaded him, winning the war and saving her people. Now, that would be the story that I would expect you to tell in your paper. But if you decided to do poor research or no research and tried to fake a contextual analysis, you might say something ridiculous like "bitches be crazy" and "don't trust a woman with your sword," which, true story, has happened in a paper. You can imagine the student didn't get a very good grade, but I use this as an example to make sure you understand that context cannot be gleaned from looking at the artwork. You must do research. And to let this be a lesson to you to not mess with my Judith. She's my woman. She's my girl. But really it's to make sure you do proper research. Because if you don't really understand it yet, then your research isn't done. For that final paper, I also want you to know that you can, one of the options of choosing an artwork is to choose something you viewed in person at a museum or a public artwork. Public artworks do include street art. So I wanted to make sure you knew how to research street art, because people think that there's no information available and you wouldn't be able to do so, but that's actually incorrect. So I have two examples here, excuse me. And what I want you to notice in the top one, Clandestine is the artist's name, and he used the top two corners, but it will be in somewhere in the four corners, in the top or bottom corners. So in the top corner, now the first artwork is very large and it's a narrow street, so I couldn't get back far enough to get the entire thing. So in the top corner, you see the word Lolita, but it's actually hashtag Free Lolita. So if you Googled that, you would actually find the Free Lolita movement, and you would get lots and lots of context. In the top right, you see the name Clandestine, and that's the artist's street name. Of course, you won't get a given name like you would some of the other artists like Vincent van Gogh, but the street artists go by their street name because they do illegal things. And so you actually will be able to find information about them based off of their street name. The one on the bottom in that top left-hand corner is her name, Faith 47, which sometimes students have a really hard time reading Faith 47's name. So if you got this and you couldn't read the name, you would just send me the photograph, and I would be able to tell you the information. So if you got something like this and you went, I really want to analyze this, but you don't know how to either read the information or you can't find the information, then just send me the image and say, can you help me with research? And I will help. So underneath the artwork, she kind of broke the rules a little bit, but it makes sense because if you notice in the two bottom corners, there's stuff kind of in the way. So Who Will Guard the Guards Themselves is the title of the artwork, which if you look that up, it would give you some information to research. The next type of analysis is an expressive analysis, but I break this up for you because I find that it makes a little bit more sense to think of this as three separate things. Now, you can do a combination of these things in the expressive analysis, but I think if you understand that this is really the things that are included in the expressive analysis, it'll really help you wrap your head around it. The first part of an expressive analysis, or thing that you can do for an expressive analysis, is a biographical analysis. Keep in mind when you're doing a biographical analysis, you're still analyzing the artwork. So putting a lot of, information about the artist and where they spent most of their life and important facts that impacted them as an artist is not really a biographical analysis. So I have this here in the slide to make sure that you can add that note to make sure you understand that you might put a little bit of this information, but don't put so much that it becomes extraneous or off topic. The information that you provide still needs to relate to the artwork, because the whole point is each type of analysis helps you understand the artwork you're analyzing better. So it's not about understanding the artist better, but understanding the artwork. So the most important thing that you're going to do is include relevant biographical information that strengthens your understanding of the particular artwork you're analyzing. And looking for personal meanings, deep psychological insights, human concerns from the perspective of the artist, their thoughts and feelings, those types of things that they share. Another thing that you can do is a psychological analysis of the artwork. And this can be done in a variety of ways. You can do a psychological analysis of the artwork, and keep in mind that psychology, not psychiatry. So psychology is about what it means to be human, rather than like diagnosing somebody with their mental illness. Okay? So exploring what it means to be human, and exploring the psyche. So considering like the things that are necessary to maintain a healthy psyche. Things like human connection, love, um, having someone to talk to, those types of things, you know. Um, and and you'll find those types of things in artwork, and you can analyze the way that an artist both explores those topics and uses those topics. And then you do research on, psychology 101 and psychology, and get, you know, um, a um, an expert to then back up your thoughts on it. This is also where you can study the psychology of color, where you do some research on the psychology of color and understand that, you know, this color suggests this and this color suggests this, etc. Um, and then the third type of psychological analysis is if, you know, the artist themselves has been diagnosed with a psychological condition. You can there will be research um, about how that has affected their artwork, and so you can use that as a type of analysis in the work about the artwork. Like Edvard Munch um, is believed to have been bipolar, as has Vincent van Gogh. And so there's research um, about that. Um, both of them sought help during their time, and so there's also, you know, research on the help that they sought, the time that they spent in asylums, and things like that. And so that type of research can then be um, included as a part of an analysis as you look at an artwork. The last type of analysis you can do as a part of your expressive analysis is a gender studies or a feminist analysis. Of course, this is not required unless you're looking at a feminist artwork. If you're looking at a feminist artwork, it's mandatory that you do a feminist analysis because the artist um, wants it done. Do you understand? So if you aren't interested in it, if you aren't interested in a feminist approach and a feminist analysis, then don't select a feminist artwork. Or if you realize that it is feminist and that you're going to have to spend time with that and that's not an interest of yours, then change the artwork. Or perhaps broaden your mindset. So here we have a self-portrait done by Chuck Close. So in terms of a biographical analysis, he's very interesting because he has prosopagnosia, known as facial blindness. He can see the different parts of your face, like your eyes and your nose and your mouth, but he can't put them together into a three-dimensional pattern so that he remembers them in the way that we remember everybody having their unique pattern, so that you remember them um, and what they look like. In fact, he once failed to recognize a woman he had lived with for a year. But if he takes a photograph and then transforms it into a huge portrait, he may remember your face, at least when he's looking straight on. Once I change a face into a two-dimensional object, I can commit it to memory. I have a photographic memory for things that are two-dimensional. Everything about my work is driven by my disabilities, he says. And it's true because originally his work used to be photorealistic. He became famous for that originally. And he had an aneurysm along his spine that left him paralyzed and in a wheelchair. After months of therapy, he regained some use of his hands, but he lost his fine motor control. And so he could no longer get that photorealism. And rather than giving up, he um, he decided to go to this pixelated style. And what's interesting about that is it made him even more famous um, and unique. And he's in his 80s now, and he's actually one of the most prolific and richest artists alive today. So this is Edvard Munch, Der Schrei der Natur, which is the scream of nature. The Norwegian word skrik is translated as scream, um, but is more similar to the English word shriek. Um, he wrote in his diary, "I was walking along the road with two friends. The sun was setting. Suddenly the sky turned blood red. I paused, feeling exhausted, and leaned on the fence. There was blood and tongues of fire. Above the blue-black fjord, and the city, my friends walked on, and I stood there trembling with anxiety, and I sensed an infinite scream passing through nature." He later described his inspiration for the image. "One evening I walked along a path. The city was on one side and the fjord below. I felt tired and ill. I stopped and looked out over the fjord. The sun was setting and the clouds turned blood red. I sensed a scream passing through nature. It seemed to me that I heard the scream. I painted this picture, painted the clouds as actual blood. The color shrieked. This became the scream." So, um, as I stated earlier, Edvard Munch was known or was believed to be bipolar. And so, as kind of a psychological analysis, you can kind of hear um, him describing his kind of break with reality. And he understands it as a break with reality, right? He he hears, he senses the scream, and then he hears an actual scream. Um, and then he hears the color scream while he paints. The the thing that's really interesting and difficult about this is that scientists actually believe that what he saw was a natural scientific phenomenon of a volcanic eruption, which can actually make this happen in the sky. Um, that it happened like a world away. And the photograph that's on the right is not doctored at all. It's actually the just the exact same phenomenon that is believed to be what he actually saw. And the thing that's difficult about this is that when you have psychotic episodes like Edvard Munch, um, it's not possible to trust what you see when you see something that could possibly be real, like the sky turning like this. But look how similar this is to what he's painted. So this is, you know, I kind of combined a contextual analysis with the psychological, if you understand. Because I started psychological, but I included a little bit of context by showing this image. We could also do the psychological analysis by doing a psychology of color. This is by Basquiat and is called Fallen Angel. So the psychology of color, there are, like blue in the background could stand for sadness, but it also could stand for peace. So it's one of those things where you have to kind of interpret it based on what you see, and I think certainly sadness would be more appropriate. Red can stand for passion, but it can also stand for anger and anxiety, and I think certainly anger, fury would be more appropriate. Yellow is a color for happiness or anxiety, and anxiety would be more appropriate. White, in this regard, can be a sign of purity or innocence, and I think that it actually is if you interpret it, because he is supposed to be an angel, but notice how the white is then tinged with the black. And I think that there is like a sadness in the way that the innocence has been lost. And that's how you start to interpret it in terms of the psychology of color. You would research psychology of color, and basically it has a list. You would find like the list of colors and the different meanings that are associated with each color. And you can read about it. It explains the different meanings and things like that, so that it'll help you to then make an interpretation and describe and explain it. And that's all that you really do. And so that's how you would analyze it in terms of the psychology of color. It's more in depth than what you have in the text. You just have to research it. Just make sure you find a legitimate source for it. And then the last would be the feminist analysis, or the gender studies. So a feminist analysis would be looking at the equality of women, and then the gender studies is just looking at the difference between men and women without a judgment call. Whereas, like a contemporary concept of feminism, it does have to do with equality. So gender studies is just about the differences rather than equality. So, which is more appropriate usually for older artworks. So this particular artwork is painted by Roy Lichtenstein, who is a man and a feminist, and painted during kind of the height of feminism. And here we have Drowning Girl. The text itself is quite quite feministic. I don't care, I'd rather sink than call Brad for help. And in that, it seems kind of humorous, but in reality, all she's saying is, I'm strong enough to save myself. Give me the chance to do it. And I would rather be able to save myself than be looked at as a damsel in distress and need to be saved. And if I die trying, I would prefer to die trying, because I am capable of saving myself. That's really what she's saying. I don't need your help. I can do this on my own. That's really what she's saying. And, if you research this artwork, it would go into to explain, the feminism movement and whatnot, and that would be part of your context, but could also be included in the um, the feminist analysis. Here we have the Venus of Willendorf, and this would definitely be appropriate for a gender studies. This is a prehistoric artwork. What's really interesting about this time period is there are no male sculptures. So there's one that's only half man and half animal. But there are tons of female sculptures. And so it would be really interesting to do a gender studies, to do some research, to suggest and discover, why that is, to come up with a hypothesis on why that might be. The last type of analysis would be an iconographical analysis. This type is not required in a paper, but because we've learned iconography, and because some of you will inevitably choose street art, I always let students know that you can do an iconographical analysis in lieu of an expressive analysis, especially if the artist is unknown. This works for really old artworks. It also works for, so it works for older artworks where you don't know the artist, and it also works for contemporary street artworks where you just can't find good information about the artwork because they usually do have iconography in them, street art. So again, this is a study of signs and symbols present in the artwork. Signs provide contextual clues that help you place an artwork in time, social class, the world, etc. Like signs of poverty might be old tools, a dirt road, a dilapidated fence, broken down cars, the specific clothes people are wearing, the food eaten, right? They need to be specific things you see in the artwork that you can point to instead of like a generic all over concept. And then symbols are items that have a metaphoric or symbolic meaning. Like symbols of hope might be a full moon because it's about to change. Spring blossoms because winter is over. A healed bird because it can fly again. Darkness turning into light, a new day. Here we have the sign of um, from Triumph of the Will, from Leni Riefenstahl. It's very clear as soon as you look at this that we're looking at Nazi Germany from World War II because of the swastika. I show this specifically because of the film itself. Triumph of the Will was released in 1935 and is a German propaganda film. Directed, produced, edited, and co-written by Leni Riefenstahl, and chronicles the Nazi Party Congress in Nuremberg, which was attended by more than 700,000 Nazi supporters. Of course, not for any kind of political reasons that I would show this, but because this film was revolutionary in its approach as a prominent example of propaganda and film itself in history. It is still used to teach film in film school today because it was revolutionary and is offered the things were introduced for the first time, such as a moving camera, aerial photography, the crossfade, adding music to cinematography, the use of the long focus lens to create a distorted perspective. It's recognized as one of the greatest propaganda films in history. Riefenstahl won several awards not only in Germany but also in the United States, France, Sweden, and other countries. It has continued to influence films, documentaries, and commercials to this day. And even though Nazi propaganda is um, is illegal in Germany um, and censored, the film itself is not censored by the courts and can be screened in public as long as it's for an educational purpose. Again, because of the revolutionary approaches, because it's such an important film. So again, that is why I use it as the sign. And here we have symbols. This should look somewhat familiar because this was used, a different one of Audrey Flack's paintings was used for the Selective Perception, her World War II. This one is Marilyn Monroe from 1977. This is another Vanitas. And here the same 5 symbols exist. For life, we have the hourglass, the candle, the fruit, the rose, etc. Death would be the same things. The modern symbols for those would be the photographs, the calendars, the watch. The calendar and the watch also symbolize time. For vanity, we have the lipstick, the lush fabrics, the perfume, the compact, the pearls, the mirror, Marilyn Monroe, and the greatest thing of vanity would be the photograph of the 2 children, because Audrey Flack wanted to put herself in the artwork, and that is actually a photograph of her and her brother. So, so in the greatest sense of vanity, she put herself in the artwork in this way. So it serves as a commemorative meditation on the life, death, and celebrity of Marilyn Monroe, as a Vanitas should. So if we combine these different types of analyses to evaluate an artwork, it makes it a lot easier to understand the meaning. So let's look at Vincent van Gogh's The Bedroom. So in the artwork, we notice how both doors are blocked, the door on the right by the giant bed, the door on the left by the small chair. The window looks like the proportions are off, affecting its ability to open. The painting does use a double complementary color scheme using violet and yellow. The walls used to be violet before light affected the color, and which is now they look blue, but originally it was violet, and red and green. There's contrast in both the color, because of the complements, and the proportions, due to the size of the bed in the smaller room with the other small objects, as noted before. There is a strong sense of outline on the objects in the room, and a lovely texture from the paint itself, nice and thick, that builds up the surface in the painting. The perspective makes the space feel claustrophobic because the walls appear to be closing in on the room as they go back in space. The paintings above the bed have an implied mass that is uncomfortably and uneasily heavy, because they appear as if they might fall on you in the middle of the night, right? Does not suggest an easy night's rest. I would not want to lay in that bed. If I did, I would want to move it away from the wall. The artwork is asymmetrically balanced with more weight on the right because of the bed, but that chair on the left that does block that door does work as a counterbalance to help maintain visual weight. The artwork is unified through color because of the use of the double complementary color scheme, creating harmony through contrast. Van Gogh's use of perspective to draw your eyes into the artwork helps to bring the painting together, creating unity, and the strong use of outline creates consistency throughout the work, making everything appear to belong together, creating a coherent whole. For the contextual analysis, the artwork is a part of the post-impressionism movement. Breaking free from the naturalism of impressionism of the late 1880s, a group of young painters sought independent artistic styles and were interested in expressing emotions rather than optical impressions, and concentrated on themes of deeper symbolism through the use of simplified colors and definitive forms. Their art was characterized by a renewed aesthetic sense as well as abstract tendencies. Van Gogh's style features rapidly applied thick paint using the impasto technique, bright colors with dark definitive outlines. After his voluntary commitment to an asylum in Saint Remy in 1889, he painted several pictures with extraordinary poignant undertones, agitated lines, brilliant colors, and distorted perspectives. His mental state and emotions were made clear in his work even when he didn't intend them to be there, which is a major characteristic of the movement. He had a deep desire to express emotions through his work, and the bedroom does show both an interest in the abstraction and use of color of the post-impressionists. For the biographical analysis, Van Gogh's 3 versions of this composition are the only record he made of the interior of the Yellow House where he lived while he was in Arles in the south of France. The home embodied the artist's dream of a studio of the South, a community of like-minded artists working in harmony to create art for the future. The first version was one of the paintings Van Gogh made to decorate the house in anticipation of arrival of his first guest, Paul Gauguin. "It's just simply my bedroom," he wrote, "only here color is to do everything, to be suggested here of rest or sleep in general. In a word, looking at the picture ought to rest the brain, or rather the imagination." Gauguin's stay at the Yellow House would be fraught with tension, and after 2 months, Van Gogh's self-mutilation and Gauguin's flight back to Paris ended the studio of the South. Van Gogh made this second of the bedroom about a year after the first while he was living at an asylum in Saint Remy. It is believed that he was bipolar, though they didn't have that diagnosis while he was alive. Vincent van Gogh committed suicide in 1890, just 1 year after completing his bedroom series. He shot himself in his room, although now some experts say that he may have been killed by an acquaintance. Van Gogh was shot in the stomach, either by himself or by others, and died 2 days later. The film offered for extra credit on movie night explores this topic further. When we combine the different types of analyses, it makes it much easier to find meaning. Because Van Gogh cannot see how the painting shows an isolated, trapped, anxiety-ridden space, because it is closed off with a bed too large for the space, and paintings off-kilter that could fall on you in the middle of the night. Because he doesn't notice or see how this could suggest anxiety or tension, but instead thinks and describes this as showing the viewer a peaceful, restful place. The painting helps to show Van Gogh's state of mind. He has broken from reality, and given that he wound up in an asylum while working on the series for self-mutilation and committed suicide just a year after it was completed, this meaning is quite plausible.